April 1944. A single letter written in pain by Private James Kellerman slipped past military censors who were screening millions of messages. The letter described American bombs falling on American soldiers, commanders who ignored warnings, and the death of the highest-ranking officer lost in Europe because of friendly fire. His words carried coordinates, casualty counts, and accusations the Army wanted buried. Private James Kellerman managed to get through what thousands of soldiers tried to confess and what the military fought to conceal, opening the door to one of the darkest and least discussed chapters in American warfare. Private James Kellerman's hands were shaking when he wrote to his wife Margaret in April 1944. He had just survived Operation Cobra, the Allied breakout from Normandy that was meant to overwhelm German forces with a massive air assault. Instead, he watched American bombers release their payloads directly onto American positions near St. Louis. The sky had been filled with thousands of B-17s and B-24s, yet poor visibility, inaccurate target markers, and navigation errors turned the operation into a disaster. Kellerman wrote exactly where the bombs fell, estimated that more than 100 Americans were killed, and named Lieutenant General Leslie McNair as one of the dead. McNair was the highest-ranking American officer killed in the European theater, and the fact that he died beneath American bombs was something no one was supposed to admit. This letter should have been stopped instantly. Every message leaving the European theater traveled through strict censorship stations, where examiners cut out anything that threatened security, morale, or the Army's public image. At the Liverpool station alone, 75,000 letters arrived every week. Censors worked day and night under dim lights, reading cramped handwriting and scanning for any mention of troop locations, equipment failures, or command mistakes. The rules left no room for interpretation. Soldiers were forbidden from including coordinates, casualty estimates, operational criticism, or any statement implying Americans had accidentally killed their own men. Yet Kellerman's letter slipped through because the censor responsible for reviewing it was exhausted and nearing the end of a 19-hour shift. After scanning thousands of almost identical letters filled with homesick greetings and vague descriptions of life at the front, he missed the warnings embedded in Kellerman's words. The letter crossed the Atlantic in a mail sack packed with thousands of others. It reached the Kellerman farmhouse on a warm spring morning. When Margaret opened it, she read information the War Department treated as restricted. She learned what really happened at St. Louis and read her husband's desperate question about how many more soldiers had to die from preventable mistakes. She was not the only one. Throughout May and June 1944, families across America received similar letters. Soldiers who survived the friendly firebombings wrote about watching entire companies vanish in explosions from their own side. They described officers who reported dangerous weather conditions but were ignored. They mentioned being ordered never to discuss the incident. Military intelligence discovered the breach when families started asking questions. A mother in Ohio contacted her congressman to ask why her son was killed by American bombs when the official telegram blamed enemy fire. A woman in Tennessee demanded clarification on casualty numbers her husband had mentioned. Each inquiry triggered alarms. Investigators traced letters back to their writers and to the censorship stations that had allowed them through. They found that the issue was not one careless censor. The overwhelming volume of mail meant many sensitive letters were escaping every week. The War Department reacted immediately. New orders were sent to every censorship office stating that any letter mentioning friendly fire must be seized at once. Soldiers attempting to send such information would face punishment. Families who already received these letters were visited by military police and asked to surrender them for national security reasons. The official explanation for the St. Louis disaster was rewritten, insisting the casualties were caused by German fire and that McNair died heroically under enemy attack. Any claim of friendly fire was labeled enemy propaganda. Margaret, however, hid her husband's letter in a trunk in the attic, sensing it held truth the government wanted erased. And St. Louis was not the first incident the Army tried to conceal. To understand the larger pattern, we must look back to an earlier operation in Sicily, where an even more devastating tragedy forced the military to tighten its grip on soldiers' voices. On the night of July 11th, 1943, Captain Charles Pitzer was flying a C-47 packed with paratroopers from the 504 Parachute Infantry Regiment. Their mission was meant to reinforce Allied troops fighting on Sicily. The plan was simple. A formation of 144 transport aircraft would pass over Allied ships at Gela Harbor, the Navy would hold its fire, and the paratroopers would jump behind enemy lines. Every ship had been told to expect friendly aircraft, or at least, that was what commanders believed. In reality, not every vessel received the message. Days of constant German air raids had also left many gunners anxious and ready to shoot at anything in the sky. As the C-47s approached the coastline, Pitzer saw bright arcs of tracer fire rising from the fleet. At first, he assumed sailors were signaling or celebrating. Then the lead aircraft exploded in a fireball that illuminated the night like a flare. In seconds, the entire harbor erupted with gunfire. Destroyers fired 5-inch shells, anti-aircraft crews unloaded their 40mm cannons, and even merchant ships joined in. The sky filled with smoke, sparks, and exploding shells. Pitzer threw his aircraft into sharp turns while terrified paratroopers were slammed against the fuselage. He survived, but 23 planes did not. They were ripped apart, burst into flames, or crashed into the Mediterranean after sustaining heavy damage. One aircraft limped back to base carrying more than 1,000 bullet holes. Colonel Reuben Tucker was in one of the surviving planes and watched transport after transport falling from the sky. He tried to radio the fleet to tell them they were shooting at friendly aircraft, but no one acknowledged him. The barrage lasted 15 minutes. When it ended, 318 American troops and aircrew were dead or wounded. Brigadier General Charles Kearns Jr., the Assistant Division Commander of the 82nd Airborne, was among the missing. Witnesses saw his plane descending in flames, and his body was never found. Official reports simply listed his death as operational causes. The next morning, Pitzer and other survivors tried to write letters home, hoping their families would understand what truly happened. Not one letter made it through. Overnight, censors in Sicily had received emergency orders. Any reference to the massacre was to be confiscated, classified, and never allowed to reach the United States. Soldiers who mentioned it were summoned for questioning and warned that discussing the incident was a court-martial offense. Still, the letters kept coming. Over the next 3 weeks, more than 500 attempts to describe the tragedy were intercepted. Censors marked them as condemned correspondence and forwarded them to military intelligence. The letters revealed details that deeply unsettled the high command. Soldiers wrote that officers had objected to the operation because naval forces had not been fully briefed. They described a complete breakdown in communication between air and naval commanders. They wrote about watching friends die while the fleet continued firing, even as burning aircraft crashed all around them. Worst of all, they described the anger spreading through airborne units as men realized the disaster had been avoidable. Eisenhower eventually ordered an investigation, but the results were classified. A few officers received private reprimands, though nothing was added to their records. The Navy quietly updated its aircraft identification procedures. None of these actions addressed the core issue. The truth was buried. Families of the dead received standard telegrams stating their loved ones were killed in action during the Sicily campaign. They were told nothing about friendly fire or the chaos that caused it. For half a century, the letters that exposed the disaster sat sealed in government archives. The Sicily catastrophe became the model for handling future friendly fire incidents. Confiscate the letters, classify the reports, shape the official story. Keep the families in the dark. And all of these happened again in January 28, 1944, where hundreds of Allied prisoners of war were once again caught in friendly fire. On January 28, 1944, liberation arrived in the form of bombs. Near Alerona, Italy, a train carrying 800 Allied prisoners of war crossed the bridge at Ponte Paglia. The prisoners, mostly British and South African troops captured in North Africa, were locked in unmarked cattle cars. The train was old, slow, and moving during daylight despite the heavy Allied bombing campaign. American B-26 Marauders spotted it and were told to destroy it because intelligence claimed it carried German troops and ammunition. No one mentioned prisoners. The bombers attacked, dropping 500-pound bombs that destroyed the bridge and the cars sitting on top of it. 400 Allied prisoners died instantly or drowned when the wreckage plunged into the river. Men who had survived Rommel's forces were killed by their own side. Technical Sergeant Michael Brennan was in the fourth car from the front. He had been captured during the Kasserine Pass defeat nearly a year earlier, and the journey to the coast had been brutal. 70 men were crammed into each rail car with almost no food, no sanitation, and only a narrow window for air. They often heard Allied aircraft overhead, but no one imagined their own pilots would mistake the train for a military target. The first explosion proved them wrong. Brennan felt the entire world twist and rupture. The car ahead of his vanished in a cloud of fire, wood splinters, and bodies. Panicked men tried to force open the locked doors as more bombs fell. Brennan's car derailed and rolled down the embankment, which saved him from the blast that swallowed the others. When he crawled out, he saw the bridge collapsed, half-submerged rail cars scattered across the river, and the bodies of prisoners caught in the wreckage or floating downstream. Roughly 400 men survived the bombing and were captured again by German guards who marched them to another camp. Brennan managed to write a detailed letter using a piece of paper and a pencil he had hidden in his boot. He described prisoners waving white cloths through the barred windows as the bombers circled for more passes. He described the train engineer admitting later that he had been ordered to stop on the bridge, though he never explained the reason. The letter was smuggled out by an Italian civilian working near the camp. It passed German and Italian censors, then Red Cross screening. But when it reached an American censorship station in Portugal, it was seized. The letter never reached Brennan's family. It was added to a growing pile of suppressed prisoners of war correspondence documenting friendly fire incidents across Italy. Many of those letters described similar tragedies. Prisoners were bombed on roads, in camps near rail yards, and on trains traveling along routes routinely targeted by Allied aircraft. Some survivors said German guards intentionally parked trains carrying prisoners near military targets, knowing Allied bombers would not be able to distinguish between them. Even when no deliberate placement occurred, the result was the same. Allied air supremacy meant near-constant strikes on transportation networks. Prisoners riding those networks simply became acceptable losses within a larger strategic plan. The censorship system created three barriers that almost no letter could overcome. German or Italian authorities removed anything they viewed as sensitive. Red Cross examiners blocked information that violated their strict neutrality rules. Finally, Allied censors intercepted any letters that had slipped through the first two layers if they contained information considered damaging to morale or military reputation. Letters about Ponte Paglia were always condemned. Brennan later learned that he had written 5 separate letters about the bombing. All were confiscated. Even when he used coded references like the bridge incident, censors caught them. The frustration among the survivors grew. They had been killed by their own forces, kept as prisoners, and silenced when they tried to tell the truth. Conditions were even worse for prisoners of war held by Japan. Most prisoners there never had any mail service at all. The few letters that survived Japanese censorship arrived covered with black ink that hid almost every line. When some of those postcards reached American censorship stations, censors made the decision to destroy them entirely. They believed families would be harmed more by knowing the truth than by receiving nothing. Internal Office of Censorship memos show that hundreds of these cards were classified rather than delivered. Families assumed their loved ones were dead or had never attempted to write. When the war finally ended, many prisoners of war tried to tell their stories. They wanted acknowledgement of the bombings, accountability for the mistakes, and answers about the suppression of their mail. Instead, they were told their memories were unreliable due to trauma or malnutrition. Official reports described incidents like Ponte Paglia as tragic but unavoidable. Survivors who insisted on telling the full story were warned that discussing classified events could bring charges under military law. The expectation was simple: accept the official version and remain silent. Yet not everyone obeyed. Brennan kept private journals documenting every detail he remembered. Other survivors formed informal gatherings where they compared stories and realized how widespread the friendly fire problem had been. When the front office of censorship officially shut down on September 15, 1945, the war had ended, but the silence it created continued. 15,000 employees were dismissed, the massive mail processing centers were cleared out, and crates of condemned letters, internal reports, and evidence of friendly fire incidents were shipped to military archives under 50-year classification orders. The official explanation claimed these records could threaten national security or damage America's image. The real reason was that the War Department did not want the public to learn how many American soldiers had been killed by American forces. James Kellerman returned to Iowa in December 1945 with this knowledge still fresh. He had written dozens of letters to his wife Margaret, many of which arrived covered in blacked-out lines, while others never reached her at all. When he saw the April 1944 letter describing the St. Lo disaster, he was shocked it survived censorship. He told Margaret about other incidents he witnessed, including American aircraft attacking friendly positions and artillery shells falling on U.S. troops due to map errors. He also told her about an unofficial order circulated after St. Lo, warning that anyone who wrote about friendly fire could face court-martial. Determined to speak out, Kellerman contacted a local newspaper. Instead of an interview, he received a visit from 2 Army investigators. They explained politely that the events he described were still classified, and discussing them publicly could lead to prosecution under federal law. They asked for his letters and notes so they could be reviewed for national security concerns. Kellerman refused and later placed the surviving correspondence in a safety deposit box. That single uncensored letter became proof that the official wartime narrative had left out crucial truths. Veterans across the country experienced similar pressure. Those who tried to describe friendly fire incidents met a wall of denial, classification, and quiet intimidation. The War Department followed a consistent strategy: deny the reports, classify supporting documents, and pressure witnesses until they gave up. Most veterans, wanting peace after years of combat, complied. Those who persisted were often dismissed as confused or traumatized. But the truth began to surface slowly in the 1970s and accelerated in the 1990s as classification deadlines expired. Historians uncovered condemned letters written by soldiers desperately trying to report friendly fire incidents. They found censors' submission slips flagging patterns of American mistakes. They located internal memoranda showing senior commanders fully understood the scale of the problem, yet chose to minimize it publicly. Casualty reports, once classified, revealed figures far higher than the official statistics. In 1995, a researcher estimated that in some operations, 15 to 20% of American casualties were caused by friendly fire. Official figures had claimed less than 2%. The difference represented thousands of deaths attributed to enemy action in telegrams sent to grieving families. The revelation caused brief outrage, but by then most veterans and their relatives were gone. Calls for accountability faded. No apology came and no formal acknowledgement of the censorship system ever followed. Then, in 2003, archivists discovered a forgotten cache of documents in a Kansas facility. It contained more than 2,000 condemned prisoners of war letters, including multiple letters written by Technical Sergeant Michael Brennan about the Ponte Paglia bombing. They had been sealed away for 58 years. Brennan died in 1987, believing every letter he wrote had simply vanished. The discovery made headlines for a moment and then disappeared from public attention. World War II seemed too distant, and the people involved were no longer alive. Yet the fundamental truth remained. The U.S. military had hidden evidence of its failures and suppressed the voices of soldiers who tried to speak honestly. James Kellerman died in 1998 at the age of 78. Before his death, he gave detailed interviews to historians, describing the St. Lo bombing and the censorship system he witnessed firsthand. He showed them the April 1944 letter, the one that slipped through by accident. It now sits in the World War II Museum in New Orleans, alongside censored mail and information about the Office of Censorship. The museum notes that an estimated 14 million pieces of mail were condemned during the war. Most remain unreleased. The stories they contain stay locked away, waiting for someone willing to bring them into the light. So, what do you think about this massive suppression of wartime testimony? Should these stories have remained classified, or did families deserve to know how their loved ones really died? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. If this story opened your eyes to hidden history, give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more such deep dives. Until next time, stay curious.